Sure you get this question a lot?
That's the problem. There's no wisdom. If you're a dumb young person and you don't do something about it, you're a dumb old person. I mean, just because you're 93 years old.
At 94, William Shatner finally admits what many around him always knew. Behind the iconic smile, behind the captain's chair of the Enterprise, there were people he never liked, never trusted, and never wanted beside him. For decades, audiences believed Star Trek was built on unity, a cast that moved as one, bound by shared ideals and mutual respect. That image was carefully maintained, but it was never the whole truth. From the earliest seasons, tension followed success, ego followed fame, and resentment followed every line that drew more applause than the last. Shatner was not a quiet star. He dominated the frame, the press, and the legacy. To some, he was a leader. To others, he was an obstacle. Conflicts were rarely explosive, but they were constant, layered into years of cold exchanges, unfinished conversations, and public bitterness that never fully disappeared. Now, age has removed the need for diplomacy. Shatner does not reframe these conflicts as harmless rivalry or professional misunderstanding. He accepts them as personal divisions that shaped his career as deeply as triumph ever did. 6 names remain attached to those unresolved fractures, each one carrying its own history of resentment, rivalry, or silent hostility. Which relationships quietly collapsed behind the scenes of television's most optimistic universe? And which name, revealed at the end, changes how that legacy is remembered? Number 6. Patrick Stewart. When Patrick Stewart stepped onto the bridge as Captain Picard, the shift was immediate and unmistakable. This was not James T. Kirk reborn, and it was never meant to be. Picard spoke softly where Kirk commanded loudly. He reasoned where Kirk charged forward. To a new generation, this felt like evolution. To William Shatner, it felt like displacement. The tension was never shouted across a room, but it lingered in tone and timing. Stewart's Star Trek arrived at a moment when television wanted maturity and restraint, and the franchise leaned into that image. Interviews began to frame Picard as the thoughtful antidote to Kirk's bravado. Comparisons followed, and with them, an unspoken hierarchy that placed the new captain above the old. Shatner did not hide his irritation. He questioned the reverence surrounding the rebooted universe and dismissed the idea that Star Trek needed reinvention. While Stewart remained diplomatic, the distance between them was evident. Public interactions felt measured, polite on the surface, but absent of warmth. There was respect, yes, but never closeness. What made this rivalry subtle rather than explosive was its nature. It was not personal in the traditional sense. It was symbolic. Stewart represented the future of a universe Shatner believed he had already defined. Every accolade directed at Picard echoed as a reminder that Kirk was being quietly archived. For Shatner, this was not hatred fueled by betrayal or insult. It was the unease of watching one's legacy reframed by another man wearing the same uniform under a different philosophy. Stewart never needed to attack him. The success of the next generation did that on its own. In the long arc of Shatner's career, Patrick Stewart stands as the first fracture. Not the deepest, and not the most bitter, but the earliest sign that the spotlight he once commanded alone would never fully return. Number 5. Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek, but he never fully controlled what William Shatner became within it. From the beginning, their relationship was marked by necessity rather than trust. Roddenberry needed a commanding presence to anchor his vision. Shatner needed a platform large enough to contain his ambition. The alliance worked, but it was never comfortable. As the series gained momentum, Shatner's influence grew beyond the script. He dominated scenes, interviews, and public perception, becoming the unmistakable face of the franchise. For Roddenberry, this shift was unsettling. Star Trek was meant to be an idea first, a universe driven by philosophy and collective purpose. Shatner's rising prominence threatened that balance, turning the spotlight away from the creator and toward the performer. Tension surfaced quietly. Roddenberry questioned Shatner's ego and accused him of placing personal image above ensemble storytelling. Shatner, in return, resisted any attempt to rein him in. He did not see himself as a replaceable component of a larger machine. He saw himself as the engine that kept it running. Their disagreements were rarely aired as open conflict, but they shaped the atmosphere behind the scenes. Scripts became battlegrounds for control. Creative decisions carried undertones of rivalry. Even as Star Trek expanded into films and global recognition, the divide between creator and star remained unresolved. What made this conflict enduring was its imbalance. Roddenberry held the authority of authorship, but Shatner commanded public loyalty. Neither could fully diminish the other. One had the blueprint, the other had the audience. For Shatner, Roddenberry represented a constant reminder that his success was born from someone else's imagination. For Roddenberry, Shatner embodied the fear that his creation no longer belonged to him alone. They continued to coexist, but mutual respect never truly replaced mutual suspicion. In the hierarchy of Shatner's rivalries, Gene Roddenberry stands as a foundational fracture, not a loud enemy, but a persistent presence whose vision clashed with Shatner's sense of ownership, setting the stage for deeper conflicts yet to come. Number 4. James Doohan. James Doohan never hid his feelings about William Shatner. Unlike others who chose diplomacy or silence, Doohan allowed his resentment to surface openly, long after the cameras stopped rolling. To the public, he was Scotty, the loyal engineer who kept the Enterprise alive. Behind the scenes, his relationship with Shatner was far less cooperative. The source of the tension was simple, and precisely because of that, impossible to resolve. Doohan believed Shatner treated Star Trek as a one-man showcase. He felt the balance of the ensemble was repeatedly sacrificed to keep the captain at the center of every moment. Lines, camera angles, promotional focus, all of it seemed to orbit one figure. Over time, irritation hardened into disdain. Shatner, for his part, never tried to mend that divide. He did not deny that he commanded attention, and he did not apologize for it. From his perspective, the role demanded authority, presence, and dominance. If others felt overshadowed, that was the cost of carrying the series on his shoulders. This fundamental difference in outlook left no room for reconciliation. As years passed, Doohan became increasingly candid in interviews. He spoke of bitterness, of being diminished, of never feeling respected by the man audiences saw as the captain of the ship. Shatner responded not with anger, but with distance. He neither challenged the accusations nor softened his stance. Silence became his answer. What makes this rivalry significant is its longevity. There was no dramatic breaking point, no single incident that could be isolated and explained away. The resentment accumulated slowly, sustained by years of unspoken frustration and professional imbalance. Even shared history could not override that sense of exclusion. For Shatner, James Doohan represents a type of conflict that never explodes but never fades. A reminder that leadership, when mixed with ego, leaves scars not everyone is willing to hide. Number 3. Leonard Nimoy. Of all the fractures in William Shatner's career, none carried the weight of Leonard Nimoy. To the public, Kirk and Spock were inseparable. Their on-screen chemistry became the emotional core of Star Trek, a balance of impulse and logic that defined the series itself. Off-camera, that bond was far more fragile than anyone imagined. For years, Nimoy and Shatner worked side by side under intense pressure. Fame arrived quickly, and with it came scrutiny, competition, and the constant measuring of who mattered more. Nimoy watched as Shatner absorbed the spotlight, not only as the lead actor but as the public face of the franchise. What began as quiet discomfort slowly turned into resentment. The breaking point did not come from a single argument. It came from accumulation. Nimoy felt used, misunderstood, and reduced to a supporting role in narratives that increasingly centered on Shatner alone. When Shatner attempted to document their shared legacy without Nimoy's consent, the damage became irreversible. Nimoy cut off communication completely. No calls, no explanations, just silence. For Shatner, the absence was devastating and confusing. He claimed he never fully understood what he had done wrong. He reached out, publicly and privately, only to be met with distance. Unlike other rivalries, this one offered no outlet for confrontation. There was no fight to win, no accusation to counter, only rejection. Years later, reconciliation came quietly, and far too late to undo the hurt. They spoke again. They stood together in public. But the rupture had already reshaped their relationship. The ease was gone. Trust had been replaced by formality. Leonard Nimoy was not Shatner's loudest enemy, but he was the one whose withdrawal cut deepest. This was not a clash of egos played out in interviews. It was the collapse of a bond the audience believed was unbreakable. And in that loss, Shatner faced something far more unsettling than criticism. The realization that success could cost him the one person who truly understood the journey. Number 2. Chris Pine. Chris Pine never had to insult William Shatner to become a problem. His very existence was enough. When the Star Trek reboot arrived, Pine stepped into the role of Captain Kirk with youth, modernity, and studio backing. He was not continuing the legacy. He was replacing it. For Shatner, this was a rupture, unlike anything before. Other conflicts had grown out of ego clashes, creative tension, or wounded pride. This one was structural. Hollywood had decided that Kirk no longer needed its original face. The character could be recast, reimagined, and marketed to a generation that had never watched Shatner on weekly television. Shatner responded with a mix of sarcasm and distance. He dismissed the reboot as shallow, questioned its necessity, and publicly expressed no desire to participate. While Pine remained respectful and careful with his words, the imbalance was clear. One man was being celebrated for inheriting a role. The other was being quietly pushed into history. This was not personal hatred in the traditional sense. Shatner did not attack Pine's talent. He did not accuse him of disrespect. What made the resentment sharper was its inevitability. Pine represented the industry's decision to move on, to preserve the brand while sidelining the man who defined it. Every successful sequel, every glowing review, reinforced the message: Kirk could survive without Shatner. For an actor whose identity had been inseparable from that character, this realization cut deeply. It challenged not just his relevance, but his ownership of the legacy itself. In the hierarchy of Shatner's conflicts, Chris Pine stands just below the final name because this rivalry was never meant to be resolved. It was generational, impersonal, and permanent. No conversation could undo it. No apology could fix it. Number 1. George Takei. No rivalry in William Shatner's life was more public, more sustained, or more unforgiving than George Takei. While other conflicts unfolded quietly or faded with time, this one hardened in full view of the audience and never softened. Even as both men entered old age, they shared the same bridge, the same scripts, and the same cultural phenomenon. On screen, they were colleagues serving a common mission. Off-screen, the divide was immediate. Takei believed Shatner embodied everything wrong with unchecked stardom. He accused him of arrogance, of treating fellow actors as disposable, and of seeing Star Trek not as an ensemble, but as a personal vehicle for attention. Unlike others, Takei refused silence. Over the years, he spoke openly and repeatedly. Interviews, memoirs, public appearances, and later social media became platforms for his frustration. He described Shatner as dismissive and self-centered, someone who never acknowledged the contributions of those around him. The criticism was not coded. It was direct, personal, and relentless. Shatner's response was just as revealing. He did not counterattack with equal force. He did not engage in public feuds or lengthy explanations. Instead, he chose a colder strategy. He minimized Takei's relevance, questioned his motives, and at times suggested that bitterness had replaced perspective. Where Takei sought confrontation, Shatner offered indifference, a gesture many found more insulting than anger. What elevated this rivalry above all others was its permanence. There was no reconciliation, no late-life handshake, no attempt to rewrite the narrative. Even as the cast aged and losses accumulated, the divide remained intact. The passage of time did not heal it. It only clarified how deep it ran. For Shatner, George Takei represents the conflict that never ended because neither side believed it should. One saw injustice that demanded exposure. The other saw resentment that did not deserve validation. Between them stood decades of unresolved tension, amplified by fame and preserved by memory. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a collision of egos and principles that defined the darker side of a legendary legacy. And in the end, it is this rivalry, more than any other, that reshapes how William Shatner's journey is remembered. William Shatner's career is often remembered through a single image: the confident captain, steady at the center of the bridge, guiding others toward an optimistic future. But that image was never the full truth. Behind the legend stood a man shaped as much by conflict as by success, someone who thrived in the spotlight and paid a price for never stepping out of it. The 6 names tied to his story are not footnotes or side characters. They are markers of a life spent at the peak of attention, where ego was both a weapon and a shield. Each rivalry reflects a different cost of fame: creative control challenged by its creator, friendship eroded by imbalance, colleagues diminished by hierarchy, a legacy threatened by reinvention, and finally, a public feud that refused to fade into silence. Shatner never presented himself as a victim. He did not seek absolution, nor did he rewrite history to appear kinder than he was. If anything, his refusal to soften these conflicts suggests a deeper truth about his generation of stars. In the golden age of television, survival often required dominance. Compromise was seen as weakness, popularity was currency, and once earned, it had to be defended at all costs. At 94, Shatner stands as both beneficiary and casualty of that mindset. He became unforgettable precisely because he never stepped aside. Yet the same force that built his legend fractured the relationships around him, leaving behind admiration mixed with resentment. In the end, William Shatner's legacy is not defined solely by the role he played, but by the battles he never avoided. He remains remembered not as a perfect hero, but as a complex figure whose brilliance illuminated others and cast long shadows at the same time. And perhaps that is the most honest ending a legend like him could leave behind.